Hi, and welcome to the presentation on my research toward LGBTQ plus inclusion and support, community analysis of challenges and opportunities within 4-H. My name is Joe Rand. I use the pronouns he, him. I am an extension educator and the 4-H Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility with the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Youth Development. Thanks for joining me today. Before we dive into the research, I think it's important to understand what 4-H is and some of the background about 4-H. 4-H is an out-of-school time youth development program. Young people engage in hands-on learning. It's for anyone in kindergarten through 1 year past high school, which we sometimes refer to as grade 13. Youth can choose a project that's interesting to them and explore it with their peers and caring adults. Oftentimes, young people, youth, are engaged in club settings. Clubs are groups of youth who want to learn together and meet in all parts of Minnesota and across the United States. Extension and 4-H primarily serve rural folks in Minnesota. And so it's important for us to understand the rural LGBTQ plus population. The Movement Advancement Project found that between 2.9 and 3.8 million LGBTQ plus, or about 10 to 15% of the total US LGBTQ plus population, reside in rural communities. Gallup research identified that as generations get younger, LGBTQ plus identities increase, and the research is starting to support this as well. 7% of millennials identify as part of the LGBTQ community, and 9.5% of youth 13 to 17 in the US, which is about 1.9 million youth, identify as LGBT. So the LGBTQ plus population is increasing, whether that's because safe spaces exist more readily for them now, they're able to connect online, or whatever the circumstances are. LGBTQ plus people live and work and learn in rural environments. And so it's important for us to consider that when we're offering programming. For LGBTQ plus youth, rural spaces can be really tough and are often the most unsafe. The research shows us that schools in rural communities are the most unsafe, that there is a lack of supportive programs. There is a lack of other out LGBTQ plus people. So that might mean that young people don't have LGBTQ plus mentors or can't envision what their life might look like in the future. There is a lack of inclusive sexuality education. Often the sex ed that's taught is straight and cis. The intolerance from community members and institutions is higher than in urban areas. Rural LGBTQ youth have the highest instances of victimization and are half as likely to have a GSA. A GSA is Gender Sexuality Alliance, and that's a group of young people that meet with their peers, usually in a school setting with an adult advisor, just to share what's going on and support one another. So let's dive into the paper. And I want to take this opportunity to thank my co-authors, Megan Paisley, Jessica Fish, and Sloan Okri Anderson. The paper itself is published in the Journal of Youth Development, and I'll include the link in the comments section of the conference website. So first, let's just talk a little bit about the methodology. Thematic analysis was applied to responses to SWOT analyses and related questions. This study was conducted in 1 US state. The majority of the participants were identified as white, middle class, and had connections to 4-H. Voting was done by multiple analysts to reach consensus. And through that coding, we identified 3 themes related to challenges and opportunities, and 2 themes just related to opportunities. First, those themes that emerged related that had challenges and opportunities related to organizational climate, policies and procedures, and training, education, and resources. 2 additional themes included opportunities only, related to community engagement and youth-specific resources. I also just want to take a moment to identify what I mean by a SWOT analysis. So SWOT is a method of analysis where the focus group can identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we did this through the lens of LGBTQ plus inclusion. This chart outlines the groups that were convened as part of the research. 40 4-H young people participated in a SWOT analysis at a leadership retreat. 16 4-H staff participated in a focus group at our staff development conference. And in that group, we used questions rather than just the headings of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And if you want to know more about what those questions were, you can check that out in the paper itself. The third group, 12 participants that were extension support staff, and that was at a staff meeting. And finally, group 4, another SWOT analysis that included 4-H youth, alumni, and parents. So first, those challenges and opportunities related to organizational climate. The challenges that emerged related to harassment and bullying that still exists within the 4-H program, and a lack of intervention when that harassment and bullying happens, that LGBTQ plus youth still feel somewhat unsafe, that there is a lack of diversity in staff and youth, that programs reinforced the gender binary, and that there was a conservative religious tone. Group 3 actually shared an experience in which an adult at a 4-H meeting responded to a discussion around creating inclusivity for LGBTQ plus youth by saying, "Why do we want those people?" They shared other examples of overt hostility by program staff and adults involved with the program, such as purposely saying mom and dad, even after a youth shared that they had 2 moms. Some of the themes about organizational climate that were identified related to opportunities were first, that the mission and values of 4-H and Extension are rooted in acceptance already, because 4-H and Extension are housed within land-grant universities across the country. Second, that 4-H already has the principles of safety and independence, that there isn't a religious affiliation for 4-H, and that part of the mission is to increase diversity and visibility. The next theme that was identified that had challenges and opportunities was related to policies and procedures. First, the challenges that were identified were a lack of inclusive policies and a reinforcement of the gender binary within the policies. Participants shared that in the absence of explicit language related to LGBTQ plus people, members of the organization could elect to ignore LGBTQ plus issues and overtly discriminate. Additionally, that the assumption that all youth are cisgender and the enforcement of gender as a binary discussed in organizational climate also showed up in policy challenges, specifically in terms of policies pertaining to group activities, bathrooms, and sleeping arrangements. Some of the opportunities, participants noted the need to explicitly apply policies related to acceptance, non-discrimination, and bullying to LGBTQ plus people, and to change or remove policies that promote a gender binary. Also to collaborate with other centers within Extension at the university. Challenges and opportunities related to training, education, and resources. The challenges were identified as a lack of LGBTQ plus training, a lack of guidance, and a lack of resources. There is no volunteer training related to LGBTQ plus inclusion within this program. There was a lack of guidance related to language and a lack of resources on how to respond to harassment and discrimination or address anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment. Opportunities that were identified included volunteer and camp counselor training, incorporating LGBTQ plus inclusion within those. Program staff also suggested that training should be trauma informed in order to address the stigma and victimization that LGBTQ plus youth experience. They suggested a training should include a focus on language, creating safe environments, and strategies for communicating their inclusivity to all constituents. Some youth suggested a regular LGBTQ plus keynote speaker at large events would be useful. Program staff identified an opportunity to update forms and documents to be more inclusive of various genders and parent and family structures. Finally, youth and alumni and volunteers suggested that a best practices handbook with housing, restroom, language, and mental health guidance would be an asset to program staff and volunteers. One of the themes that only emerged with opportunities was around community engagement. First, that 4-H should ally with LGBTQ plus organizations to create partnerships and to increase diversity within the 4-H program. Second, the engagement with the university itself. The university has an Office of Equity and Diversity and a Center for Queer and Trans Life. And finally, to be more visible at Pride events and in order to recruit LGBTQ plus people to the 4-H program. The other theme that emerged that only indicated opportunities was related to youth-specific resources. Focus groups provided several examples, including an LGBTQ club within 4-H youth groups, youth advocacy clubs for youth to learn about and practice advocacy skills, peer mentorship programs for older and younger youth to connect on shared identities and experiences, support groups, youth retreats specific to gender and sexuality, and other groups that increase empowerment and visibility of LGBTQ plus youth. This study has important implications for the 4-H program, rural community practice, and research, including strategies to improve LGBTQ plus inclusivity through education, programs and policies, hiring, and community partnerships. Additionally, this study highlights the opportunity and unique positionality of the 4-H program to amplify youth voices in the creation of youth-specific resources. So first, 4-H should consider strategies related to education programs and policies, hiring and community partnerships in order to increase inclusion for the LGBTQ plus community and improve the climate for LGBTQ plus youth. 4-H programs can also adapt policy and program changes to promote inclusion of LGBTQ plus youth. Next, that we equip participants at all levels with strategies to effectively respond to harassment and prejudice. We need to reconsider strategies that actively recruit and retain LGBTQ plus people, diversity in staffing and leadership. And 4-H should consider how to codify and promote state implementation of the strategies that are outlined in a document called the Practices for Inclusion of Individuals of All Genders and Sexual Orientation that was created by the National 4-H Access, Equity, and Belonging Committee. And in doing so, 4-H leadership will have to consider how to support LGBTQ plus youth, volunteers, and staff in communities that might be more hostile toward or rejecting of LGBTQ plus people and identities. 4-H programs need to examine community partnerships to determine whether partners are inclusive. If we're partnering with organizations that are anti-LGBTQ plus or are intolerant of the LGBTQ plus community, that sends a real negative message to the LGBTQ plus community, and that may prevent them from participating in the program. And finally, to build on some existing programs, including the Ohio 4-H LGBTQ plus Youth Summit and the Washington State 4-H Teen Equity and Inclusion Task Force. That wraps up the overview of my research. Thanks for joining us today. Make sure to add comments in the discussion on the conference website. I'll also put a link to the paper there. It's open access, so you should be able to read that or download it. And again, thanks for coming. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out. My email is joerand@umn.edu. Have a great day.